Hi everyone, this is your Professor Tom Wolf, and today I thought I'd do a video feedback rather than our traditional written feedback so everyone can see each other's work and also so you have an opportunity to see what direction that you should be headed in for your final project. I think that I can sort of talk a little bit more at length in this video format, so uh, stuff that is really working well for you, we can reinforce, and things that I think you need to do a hard change up on, we can also get you going in the right direction on that. So with that, I'm going to look at each person's work here and give you some feedback on it. So first of all, we have Alexis's project, and if you get a chance to read this here, you can see that she's sort of working with the surrounding beauty around the neighborhood of Canisius. And one of the things that I really like here is that she talks about beauty being something that is very personal, and that it is not necessarily a cliche thing like a sunset on a beach. So she's taking something that's very simple, like the campus, perhaps not something everyone would think of as being beautiful, and through her photography is going to elevate that to being beautiful. One thing in the written part here that I'd just like to point out, Alexis, some of the terms that you're using here, it's an f-stop, not an f-score. So I know these terms can be pretty confusing. We've thrown a lot of them at you in a short period of time, but just that's a pretty important term, f-stop. So just keep that in mind as you move forward. And yes, of course, I certainly hope you are using different settings on different things. We certainly don't want to be shooting everything on the same settings. So let's take a look at some of your images, or all of your images here for your samples, or let's say the images that get us started on the project. So the first and third images I really like. I think that you're using light here to really create an interesting image. The light is kind of low. It's giving us some really dramatic shadows here, which is emphasizing the texture in the chapel. And the dark shadows here create a wonderful contrast with the bright highlights in here. So this image, while it's about the college and the campus, it's also sort of a study in light. And from that perspective, I think it works really well. And it's also, an angle of the campus that probably is not an obvious one, a little bit different one, maybe coming from the dorms. I guess you'd probably see that a lot. But most images of the chapel are ones that we see from the front of it with that big rose stained glass window. Here you're doing it from the side, and in this instance, I think that is pretty creative. Your second shot, on the other hand, kind of like there's not a lot going on here. I almost wonder, if the casual observer walked down Main Street with, an iPhone and just pointed it up at the traffic coming down the road, how much different that shot would be. Probably not very different. So in this instance, I think you've got sort of an ordinary image that somehow you need to elevate it to the extraordinary. Probably the best way to do that, I would say, is what you did in your first image. You had really interesting light going on in the first image, and here I think if you brought some interesting light to it, it might make this a different image, especially shooting this maybe early evening, 7 or 8 o'clock, when the shadows become really long from the traffic coming down Main Street. Then perhaps you might have something there. But as it stands, I think it's pretty ordinary. So think about ways you can elevate that image to extraordinary. And then thinking about extraordinary here again, the strength of your work is the light. The light is beautiful. Here we've got, it looks like post sunset or dusk, or where we have that afterglow in the sky. And what really makes it interesting here is these beautiful clouds They add a lot of texture to the image and interest to it. And I think that sort of this free form, random shape to the clouds contrasts really beautifully to the very rigid, hard structures of the skyline and the buildings of the college. So again, great shot, works really well. I think that will be very good for your portfolio. So the direction I want you to head is images 1 and 3 here, using really interesting, exciting light. Try to shoot at times early morning or early evening when that light is going to be interesting. And kind of keep in the back of your mind the thought that, hey, if I could shoot this image with an iPhone, or any casual observer walking down the street would have been able to take this photograph, then you want to say to yourself, that's probably a photo I want to edit out of this series. So good luck with everything, and look forward to seeing the final product. So next up we have Lauren's images, and Lauren is doing a project titled A Lake Life, and what she is trying to convey is the sense of tranquility that surrounds the lake, that is kind of in contrast to her everyday life that is very busy, whether it's running from soccer to basketball or doing homework or schoolwork or whatever the case. So this is, I guess, intended to be sort of a very tranquil and relaxing piece. That being said, I think this whole series of images, I'm just going to scroll through them slowly here so everyone gets a first glance at them. I think these images are really, really busy. There's a lot going on in them. So I don't get the sense that they're very tranquil. However, that being said, I do think the images are all really wonderful. I just think that if tranquility is what you're going for, you've got to simplify these images and clean them up. Of course, if you want to change that message and move to something that talks about sort of the busyness or the activity, or the way that this lake has developed in terms of the older docks and other pieces of the cottages and details that are in there that make it unique. I'm totally comfortable with that. I'm just not getting tranquility out of this at all. And quite honestly, this image here, I don't see tranquil at all. We've got really rough waves. We've got the sort of wake or the waves pounding against the wall, and almost the way this kayaker looks, it almost looks like the boat is tilting to the left. And remember, we talk about diagonal lines a lot in stuff, and I know we've got this straight line here, but we've also got this diagonal line and another diagonal line there that tend to be very active and full of energy. And again, another diagonal line here, another diagonal line here, and another diagonal line here. So, I think I want you to back off the idea that you want to express tranquility. You've got something here, definitely. The images really work well. I like what's going on here, but I just don't get the sense of tranquility here. If we were going to go tranquility on this image, I think maybe I would just want to focus in very tightly on the flowers and part of the bench here. But instead, we've got a lot of busyness going on in the background, and that busyness says to me that there's a lot going on here, that this is a very active, lively place. So maybe think about that direction as you start crafting your artist statement and you go along. So out of the images that you have here, I like this shot a lot. As I said, maybe I might simplify this image a little bit, coming close into this area, and especially this stuff over here. I don't think any of this really adds to the photo. So maybe we could start your frame edge right here. And I also wonder maybe if you could shoot this in a little bit sweeter or better light. The light here is just kind of flat and bluish gray. Perhaps you catch it when it's sunset, or maybe this area is in shadow. Maybe you catch it when there's a little bit of sun on it. I think that would be a little bit more interesting here. I know you're trying to as you said here, you don't want to amplify things, but I also think by shooting it in a situation where the lighting is a little bit more interesting, you can raise the aesthetic pleasure that we get out of this scene without having to resort to the trickery of Photoshop and stuff like that. So again, perhaps maybe just thinking about that in that terms. Again, another image that you've got an awful lot going on in here. Lots of different shapes, squares, diagonals, rectangles, and even the boat in the background. Again, I like the shot. I think it works really well. I just, again, wonder if shooting it at a better time might make this image more interesting, especially the background here, the hills in the background and the sky is pretty blown out. And I think one of the reasons for that is you're exposing for this area that's in the shadow here. So maybe we wait until everything's in shadow or everything's in sunlight. So perhaps shooting this image at 9:30 at night when there's still a little bit of light, but everything is more evenly lit. Maybe that's the way to go here. I love this shot. I think this is a great shot. A lot going on here. But again, I get the sense that it feels more energetic to me than tranquil. So think about what you're saying in your artist statement. Is it really tranquility, or maybe is it just getting away from the city and being able to experience maybe more natural elements, or maybe more of I'm trying to think how to put this, more of a lifestyle that doesn't involve, concrete and buildings and cars and stuff like that, that we're talking more about, water and more of a lifestyle that isn't crowded by the trappings of an urban scenario. And then again, your last image, I love this image too, using the mirrors in here. You can kind of work all the different details from the dock to the cottages in the background. And this, having this mirror in focus kind of gives the image also a real sense of three-dimensionality. I'm struggling with that word. The image feels like it has a lot of depth to it. So I like it a lot from that perspective. So Lauren, nothing wrong with these images at all. I think they're all pretty strong images. I think that just the thing you've got to do, and especially with these first two images, is maybe shoot them in a little bit better light, or a little bit more interesting light would be a better way to put it. Last two images are really strong. I love both of these shots, and I think they'll work really well in a portfolio. And then just to wrap up here, again, I think that maybe the idea of tranquility is not necessarily something that we have here. I think that, maybe crafted a little bit differently in your artist statement, and I think you'll get there. I like this. Maybe focus in on, sort of behind these flaws is a special, unique place that I fall in love with all over again every summer. So maybe that's the direction to go on that. So good job, and keep up the good work here, and just really look for that beautiful lighting. I mean, there's no reason, if you're staying there all summer, that you can't go out, around 9:15, 9:30, and really shoot in that beautiful light. So look forward to seeing your final portfolio. So next up we have Thomas's work, and he is going to be working on photographs of signs and I guess signs that are within parks. So a couple things that I really found interesting about his little statement here. Uh, we've got signs of the sentence, signs also tend to tell us rules, but with this project I want to flip the rules and use unusual f-stops and ISOs to create an effect of how these signs truly work. So I love that. I think that's a great use of concept here, and it's a way of elevating these signs to something that is extraordinary rather than something that is ordinary. So that is where we're at. Let's take a look at some of these images. So first of all, I always love reflection shots, and I love what you're doing here with sort of the sign in the rear view mirror or in the side view mirror on the vehicle. I think it's a great shot. The one thing I might recommend is in an image like this, using a really high f-stop, because our mirror itself, and when I say the mirror itself, the support mechanism that's actually holding the mirror is out of focus because the focus is on this spot. So to get this in focus too, we really need a large f-stop. So just think about that as you're shooting it. But again, I think this is a pretty sharp photo. Maybe I would include just a little bit more around the outside here, just giving us a little bit more sense of where it is and the atmosphere that it's in. Your next image, I really like this again. Beautiful composition, lots of negative space, and when I say negative space, empty space here, it forces our eye to go right to the sign here. I love how everything is green here except the yellow sign, which again really causes our eye to go to that sign. And then lastly, if you remember that rule of thirds, you've got this image or the thing that is really interesting in the photograph right in that spot that is kind of the golden intersection in the rule of thirds. So it's perfectly placed here. Great shot, beautifully composed image. Everything's working here. I'm not sure I'd do anything to change that shot. So good job on that. Again, another image kind of similarly composed as the last one, which is great. I like when you're doing a lot of similar composition because it says that this is a style that is unique to you. So I think that works really well. Again, you've created a palette that's mostly green in the background, so that sign kind of sticks off from it or jumps out. The other thing I really love about this sign is that it's got like a little bit of wear and tear to it. I'm just going to blow up this image a little bit here so we can look at this a little bit bigger. You know, it's a little faded. It's not perfect. It's weathered, which makes it interesting. So I think this is one of these things that you can look for, Thomas, as you're doing these signs. Look for signs that might not necessarily be common. Signs that have sort of like a little bit of character to them, a little bit of personality to them. So try to maybe avoid, you know, the picture perfect, clean, just put up sign, and instead look for signs that sort of show that they've lived a life and have some character and have some unique and interesting traits to them. So really strong project. I think you're well on your way here. Just keep up the good work. And, you know, again, I keep telling everybody else, and certainly it's the case here, looks like you're shooting in midday. Maybe you want to try shooting some stuff a little bit later afternoon and see if you get some more interesting results with the light. So good job here, and look forward to seeing your final images. So next up we have A. Frank's photo. I don't know whether I should call you A or Frank, but I'll call you Frank, and if that's not correct, my apologies to you. So what you are working with is images of food, which certainly can be extraordinarily beautiful. I mean, we look at the way some really good chefs plate food, and that itself is a work of art. So this certainly has the potential for being something really wonderful. So looking at your images, and you did mention to me that you didn't think these were your greatest images, and you said these are just sort of sample images. So I'm going to agree with you on that. I think that they give me an idea of what you're trying to do, but they're definitely not portfolio quality images. So I like this image from the sense of the way you composed it. You again have a lot of negative space here. Sort of the interesting part of the photograph is here, and it almost feels like I visually want to roll the tortilla over onto the taco. So from that perspective, it works really well. What you do have to do here, though, is fix your exposure. This is way underexposed or way too dark. And also, your depth of field here is really small, and I think you need to use a large depth of field and have all of the toppings in the burrito in focus. So the way you're probably going to have to do this is you're going to have to use a tripod. And if you don't have a tripod, you certainly are welcome to go up to the media center and sign out a tripod. But this really screams out for shooting on a tripod. So with the tripod, you can have slow shutter settings and have correspondingly high f-stop values here, which is going to give you the very large depth of field. So pay attention to your exposure here and look for a large depth of field. Again, I think a really well composed image. I like sort of the diagonal line that again leads us to whatever's in the pan here. Looks like some sort of meat, must be the toppings for the burrito. But in any case, again, great job with your composition. I like the way the image is structured itself. It's just a matter of exposure. And again, probably a little bit more interesting light here. Looks like you're just using the kitchen lights, and maybe you want to think about bringing in, like a shop light or some other light and kind of play around with it to maybe give us a little bit more interesting lighting here in this photograph. And then speaking of lighting, again, I think here, your image is very interesting. I love, you certainly have a great sense of composition, and it's working here again very well. But the lighting here is soft, and it's a little bit on the bluish side. So again, maybe I would recommend bringing in some sort of light, whether that's like a floodlight or some other light. And by the way, you can again go up to the media center and sign out lights that they have up there that you can use in this, and maybe try and work with some lighting to bring out the texture in these cookies and bring out the color a little bit. The color here is kind of looking like, really flat and gray, and doesn't make me want to eat the cookies. You want that color in the cookies to really pop and look, appealing to our taste buds here. So think about that as you are working through your images. So keep pushing yourself, think about lighting, get your exposure set, and get yourself a tripod. And look forward to seeing your final prints. So next up we have Kelly's work. And Kelly is going to be working over at Amherst State Park, a place that is near and dear to my heart too. Some place that I go for a walk with my daughter every so often. So interested to see what you are ultimately going to come up with here. So here's the thing, Kelly. When we are working with landscape shots, and this is pretty much a landscape project that you have here, you've got to think about having something interesting in the foreground and something interesting in the background. So create this nice foreground-background relationship that sort of allows the viewer to work through the photograph. I think that you're heading in that direction for sure in this image. We've got this beautiful bridge in the background. In the foreground, we've got sort of these little rapids or tiny little ripple pools, stuff like that. But I think you just need something more in the foreground here. The foreground feels really empty. So whether that is a big rock, maybe some cattails, even uh, some litter that might be in the creek. Anything that you can really get to give us something that sort of grounds that foreground. You'll be surprised what a difference it makes when you have that solid object in the foreground. I think as we move down to this image here, actually, I think you had it right here. These flowers or the growth on the side of the shoreline. I think that is your perfect foreground anchor, which I like to call it. Anchoring your image in the foreground with something, but then in this image, our background is kind of not interesting. So ideally, maybe I'd love to have this piece of foliage somewhere in the foreground of this image with the bridge in the background of that image. And I think we'd have something really special. I'm looking in this shot here too. Looks like there's a log or something like that floating in the water. That's something else that you can use to start that foreground background relationship. Another thing that I might suggest working with here is some slower shutter settings. If you go a little bit earlier in the morning or later in the evening when there's not sun right on the not direct sun right on the creek, you'll be able to take some images with a really slow shutter setting. So let's say you take your ISO setting down to 100, your f-stop setting up to 32 or 22, whatever the highest is you can get on your camera. Then you're probably going to get a shutter setting of maybe a quarter of a second, a half a second, maybe even a second or more. And what that is going to do is going to make this water kind of have sort of like a dreamy, soft surface to it that, again, might be interesting. I'm not saying that it's going to work, but certainly something that is worth experimenting with and trying to make your images different. I like what you have here. Your images are good. There's nothing inherently wrong with them. I think technically you're strong here, but if you want to take your images up to the next level, I think two things: establishing that foreground background relationship, and then maybe shooting in a little bit nicer light. Again, this feels, and I say it to everybody, feels like middle of the day sunlight, which is a very common way to shoot stuff. If you can get out at dusk or early in the morning when the light is a little bit more interesting, again, I think that maybe your images might take that one step forward so that they really look like something special. So again, good job here. I think you're off to a good start. Really great concept. I like what you're doing. Just work on getting that foreground background relationship going and work on getting some nice lighting that is interesting. So look forward to seeing your final project and enjoy the great outdoors. Okay, next up we have Celia's photographs, and she is showing us the beautiful parts of Buffalo, and especially from the perspective of someone who originally lived in Boston and has now embraced the beauty of Buffalo. So, love the idea, love the concept. I think you've got a lot of stuff to work with. Just scroll through the images for everybody to see. I think that there's two things that immediately come up here that I want you to address as you're moving forward in your project. First of all, take a look at this image. Notice it kind of feels a little flat and dull. Looks like you went out and took this image on a day that was probably overcast or a little hazy or something like that, and it looks like it was probably taken during the middle of the day. I know I'm banging the drum for everybody here, but you've really got to go out and shoot when the light is interesting, and it is not interesting in this photograph. So try to make some time to get out, maybe 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock, and go down to the waterfront and shoot this when the light is really beautiful. And I think it's going to make all the difference in the world to your project. The second thing here that I want to point out is that your image doesn't have one specific area that our eye goes to or our eye lands on. I bet if I showed this image to 5 different people, they'd give me 5 different answers as to where the eye goes. You've really got to provide your viewer with sort of a visual roadmap of how to work through an image. And I think you did that to a certain extent on this image. You know, you've got this beautiful line from the skyway that causes our eye to work through the image here and kind of goes across the Buffalo River right to these series of trucks that are stationed on the shoreline. So I think that's a well-composed image. It's kind of sorted out for us so we can look at it and work our way through it. And our eye ultimately ends up or stopping somewhere in the photograph. Here, I think it's just sort of, it feels like a busy mishmash of a lot of boats thrown together. You know, quite honestly, this negative space or this empty space you have here is really great. And, you know, you have one lonely boat here or one kayaker or something like that, then all of a sudden our eye probably would go to that and it would be a different photo entirely. So think about that. You know, it might take some patience. You might have to sort of wait around for a little bit to wait for a boat to come through there. But I think that is really what's going to make all the difference in this image. So think about that. Think about shooting at a time when the light is really nice. You know, again, same way in this image, kind of a busy shot. It feels like the composition is just very casual rather than thought through very deliberately and in a way that helps the viewer understand what's really exciting in this image. I mean, I look at this image and what do I see as being exciting? Well, it's the fire hydrant, which, you know, if you want to talk about all the beautiful, exciting things in Buffalo, I think you're talking about, you know, the sculpture of the buffaloes, the beautiful architecture and the buildings, the fountains, stuff like that, not the fire hydrant. So you've got to recompose this photograph so that the interesting things that support your concept are the things that ultimately come out in the image. So work on that. You know, get out late in the afternoon, early in the evening, and get some shots in good light, and really pay attention to that composition. And I think your project will be very successful. So keep at it, and look forward to seeing your images. So next up, we have Amanda's photographs, and Amanda's kind of doing similar to what Celia was doing in her images, working with the beauty of downtown Buffalo and the Canal Side area. I have to say, this is probably one of my favorite shots that I've seen so far from the group. A simple shot, not a lot going on in the shot, but I think that's what really resonates with me. I'm attracted to the beautiful lines that are going on in here. It's a simple image, but it's very graphic. It has sort of a beautiful geometric form to it that I think is very aesthetically pleasing. The way you've sort of cut up the frame with this pole in the middle and then these beautiful drooping chains on both sides of it. I think this is just a total home run shot. You know, maybe if I had to say one thing I would want to change is maybe I just want to lower my frame just a little bit down here so this last series of chains doesn't get cut off at the bottom of the frame. But I think this is a perfect example of how you can take things and just really simplify them down to their form nothing else, and have a really powerful and visually pleasing image. So great job on that image, Amanda. Your second image, I know you mentioned in your write-up here that it's kind of cliche, but the cliche was too hard to pass up, so you took it anyways. Yeah, I agree with you. It probably is a cliche photograph, but I think again, maybe simplifying your image and working with just some of the shapes that are going on in this image. And I'm gonna just blow it up a little bit here, and maybe your image is just something like this, where you're working with some of the shapes that are in, cut the frame off just like this, and that is what your image then is. Just using those shapes and those patterns and using, downtown Buffalo as an inspiration, but it doesn't have to be completely obvious that it's downtown Buffalo. It certainly can be, just something that is a very form-based project. So I like that idea. I think that first image should be your inspiration for the rest of your images. So keep heading in that direction, and I think you'll have an absolutely wonderful project. So keep at it. And next up, we have Gustavo's work, and in his project, he is going to do a series of images that are advocates for the environment and the planting of trees, and just showing how we can be sort of stewards of the environment through our actions. So let's start looking at his images. You see his first shot, he certainly has the trash can in the foreground. It's a great title image, I think, because it has this logo here for the Olmsted Parks, which is a park system in Buffalo. And then he's got this beautiful line that sort of leads us in the background here. Only two refinements on this image. I think I'd probably want to shoot this image with a higher aperture setting. So move that f-stop value up closer to 22. And then we would have a large depth of field here. So everything would be in focus. I think that would work really well in this image. And then I'm always one who likes to not cut things off at the bottom of the frame. Here you've cut off this garbage can at the bottom of the frame. I think I'd like to just see the bottom of the tote, see where the wheels are. I think that grounds it a little bit better, especially on landscape images like this. Second image, I think it's composed really well. Beautiful lines in here. Very, very simple. Not a lot going on in there, but I think, again, that's what works about the image. It isn't too busy, so our eye can sort of work through things and embrace and absorb everything that's in there. I would just say, again, maybe I want to shoot this in a little bit better lighting. The sky is kind of hazy and doesn't have much interesting things going on in it. I'd like to see either a blue sky or a sky with some nice puffy clouds, or even something around sunset where we get a little bit more color in the sky. But other than that, I think a good job here and very strong image. And then last but not least, I think this is a beautiful shot. It really talks about the relationship between the environment and humankind here. We've got the tree, and then we've got the bench that's set up beautifully right alongside it. So it really speaks to sort of the coexistence of the two things and how they can live together. Love this shot. I think it, again, really, really beautiful image. And I think that if you can put together another 8 to 10 images that are as strong as this, you're going to have a fantastic portfolio. So look forward to seeing your images, and keep up the good work here. So last up, we have Stephen's work. Stephen is taking everyday, ordinary objects and kind of elevating them to an art form. And in a sense, his intent is for us to kind of look a little bit more deeply at things that we kind of take for granted or sort of pass up all the time. So first shot, I think it's great. Your lighting is really wonderful here. It brings emphasis to the edges or the texture in these bottle caps. And I like the way that you set it up so that our eye kind of works through the frame from the left to the right and ends up in this cap right here that says the answer is in your other hand. So the one thing here that I want to talk about, and a few of you guys have had this issue, is this very small depth of field. In this image, I think we want a large depth of field here. And if you zoom into this photograph, you can see that the writing is actually not in focus, and that's because the area of sharp focus really is right over here. So the way we solve this is you've got to have a tripod and you've got to shoot it with an aperture value or an f-stop value of 16 or 22. This is going to give you a large depth of field, and especially when you're working very close to things, your depth of field becomes exaggerated, so we need to have that really high f-stop value here. So that's the only thing that I really want you to work on here. Get your f-stop value up higher so that you have a larger depth of field in this image. Again, really love the shapes that you're working with here and the formal aspects, meaning the geometric aspects of the images are working really well. Same way with this image. I think it's a really great image. I love the fact that it is a little bit abstract here, that it takes a while for us to look at it and figure out what it is. But again, you can see how you've got the very small depth of field working here. Only the string from the tea bag is in focus, and all this, especially the edge of the cup, are out of focus. I think we need those in focus, and the answer to that is really, again, the large depth of field. So you got to go in, use a tripod, or if you don't have a tripod, sign one up from the media center. And if you don't have time to do that, then maybe you just got to put your camera up on a shelf or on some books or something that you can stabilize it so that it allows you to have that large depth of field. Because what's going to happen when you put your aperture to 22, your shutter setting is going to get much slower, and there's going to be the risk of shaking. So to eliminate that risk of shaking, we want to stabilize the camera here. And the way to do that is with a tripod or putting it on a stable surface. So other than that, I think you've got a really good project going here. So look forward to seeing the end product, and keep focusing in on that large depth of field for the shots.